The old cabin stood forgotten among towering pines, its weathered logs telling stories of a life long abandoned. Sarah Parker stood before it, one hand on her swollen belly, the other clutching the key her grandmother had left her. Tears mixed with rain on her face as she surveyed what would become her refuge after the divorce that had shattered her world. The rotting porch creaked beneath her feet, warning of the work ahead. Inside, dust motes danced in beams of light filtering through a damaged roof. Broken furniture and memories lay scattered across warped floorboards. Could a broken woman really rebuild a broken home? Would the mountains that once healed her grandmother now heal her too? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last box was taped shut, its cardboard sides buckling under the weight of 5 years of marriage, compressed into disposable containers. Sarah ran her fingertips across the moving label, a lump forming in her throat. The empty apartment echoed with ghosts of arguments and broken promises, the shadow of a life that had collapsed in slow motion. "You sure about this?" Melissa stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "My spare room is still available. Mountains are pretty isolated for someone in your condition." Sarah instinctively placed her hand on her swollen belly. 6 months along now, the baby had become her compass when everything else spun wildly out of control. "I need this." "Mel!" Sarah pulled the sonogram picture from her wallet. The grainy image of her child's profile, now worn at the edges from constant handling. "We both do." The divorce papers had been signed just 3 days after she'd learned about the pregnancy. James hadn't even paused when she told him. His mind already made up, his affections redirected to his younger colleague months before. "Convenient timing," he'd said, with a coldness that still burned. The lawyer's call had come like a lifeline in those darkest days. Her grandmother's cabin, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, now belonged to her. Property she'd forgotten existed from childhood summers that felt like another lifetime. "Dr. Chen thinks I'm crazy too," Sarah said, checking her watch. The moving truck would arrive at the storage facility within the hour. "She gave me the number for 3 obstetricians near the mountain town. Practically begged me to make appointments." Melissa hefted a box labeled kitchen and grimaced at its weight. "You never were one for taking the easy road." "The easy road led me here," Sarah replied, gesturing to the empty apartment. "So I'm trying something different." They worked in companionable silence, loading Sarah's sedan with only what she deemed essential. The larger furniture would remain in storage, unnecessary for cabin life and unwelcome reminders of what had been lost. The phone rang, its harsh tone cutting through the empty space. Sarah's jaw tightened when she saw the caller ID. "Yes, James?" The formality in her voice was a shield, newly developed. "The settlement paperwork needs your signature by Monday." His voice, once the sound of home, now felt like an intrusion. "My lawyer says you're leaving town?" "That's right," without discussing it. "What about my rights to what, James?" "You made it perfectly clear this baby wasn't part of your 5-year plan." The words came out steadier than she felt. "The papers will be signed before I leave." She ended the call before her voice could betray her. Hands shaking as she pocketed the phone, Melissa pretended not to notice the tears, busying herself with reorganizing boxes in the car trunk. "Got your prenatal vitamins packed somewhere accessible?" Sarah nodded, grateful for the practical question that anchored her back to the present. By early afternoon, the apartment keys had been returned to the building manager. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the 12th floor windows that had framed her life for half a decade. "Text me when you get there," Melissa said, embracing her friend. "And every day after that. Promise me." "I promise." The city fell away in her rearview mirror, concrete and glass gradually yielding to suburbs, then farmland, and finally the foothills. Sarah drove with the windows down despite the autumn chill, as though trying to blow away the remnants of her old life. 6 hours later, the GPS signal weakened as the roads narrowed and climbed, modern conveniences fading with each mile. Sarah stopped at a gas station at the base of the final mountain ascent, the last outpost before her grandmother's property. "Parker girl, ain't you?" The elderly man behind the counter squinted at her. "Edie's granddaughter. Remember you running round here summers back?" Sarah smiled, surprised to be recognized after nearly 20 years. "Yes, sir. Heading up to my grandmother's cabin. Been empty since she passed, going on 5 years now." He shook his head, glancing at her pregnant belly without comment. "Roads get tricky up there. Need anything before you head up? Next delivery truck doesn't come till Tuesday." She added batteries and extra canned goods to her purchase, suddenly aware of how unprepared she might be. As she climbed back into her car, she touched the sonogram picture tucked in her visor. "Almost there, little one. Just you and me now." The sedan struggled on the final ascent, city tires slipping on the gravel road. Pine trees closed in around her, the late afternoon sun filtering through in broken patterns. With each curve in the road, the weight on her chest seemed to lighten, replaced by a nervous anticipation. When the trees finally parted to reveal the small clearing, Sarah caught her first glimpse of what would either be her salvation or her folly. The cabin stood weathered and forlorn, more dilapidated than her childhood memories had prepared her for. Shifting into park, she felt the baby move, as if offering encouragement. Sarah took a deep breath of pine-scented mountain air and reached for the door handle, ready to step into whatever came next. The first light of dawn filtered through broken window slats, waking Sarah from a fitful sleep on the musty couch. Her back ached in protest as she pushed herself upright, taking in the cabin's interior by daylight. What had seemed merely neglected in yesterday's fading light now revealed itself as truly dilapidated. Water stains mapped constellations across the ceiling. Floorboards had warped, creating undulating waves beneath her feet. Mouse droppings dotted the corners, and cobwebs draped like gossamer curtains from the exposed rafters. "Well," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "Welcome home." The kitchen sink produced a stream of rust-colored water when she turned the handle, sputtering before finding a consistent flow. Sarah let it run, hoping clearer water would emerge. While waiting, she opened drawers at random, taking inventory of what remained: mismatched silverware, moth-eaten dish towels. A manual can opener crusted with decades of use. In the third drawer, beneath a stack of faded receipts, she discovered her grandmother's old Polaroid camera, surprisingly intact. Sarah lifted it carefully, checking if it still contained film. The yellow cartridge indicator showed 3 shots remaining. A small miracle. Outside, the morning chill bit through her sweater as she circled the cabin, coffee mug in hand. The cedar shake roof had surrendered in sections to weather and time, with visible gaps where rain would pour through. The stone chimneys seemed solid enough, though vines had claimed much of the north-facing wall, their tendrils working between mortar joints. Behind the cabin, she discovered the woodshed, half-collapsed but still sheltering a modest supply of split logs. Nearby stood a rusted rain barrel and the entrance to the root cellar, its door hanging precariously on one hinge. One thing at a time, she reminded herself, overwhelmed by the scope of work facing her. Back inside, Sarah uncovered her grandmother's toolbox beneath the sink, a heavy metal rectangle coated in dust. The latches protested when opened, revealing basic tools: hammer, screwdrivers, pliers, a handsaw with rust speckles dotting the blade. Not nearly enough for what she needed, but a start. She found the circuit breaker box mounted beside the back door. Half the switches triggered nothing when flipped. The others powered bare bulbs hanging from ceiling fixtures and exactly 2 electrical outlets in the main room. "Solar's probably shot," she muttered, remembering the panels her grandmother had installed on the south-facing slope. Another item for her growing mental list. The bathroom was little more than an afterthought, a toilet with a cracked tank lid, a clawfoot tub with no shower attachment, and a sink that leaked from its pedestal. At least the toilet flushed, though the sound it made suggested that relationship might be temporary. By midday, Sarah had compiled a comprehensive assessment in a spiral notebook she'd packed, pages divided into urgent needs and eventual projects. The urgent column already spilled onto a second page. Roof first, she decided, then water, then heat. She stepped outside again, raising the Polaroid to capture the cabin's current state. The camera whirred, ejecting a grey square that slowly revealed the weathered structure against the mountain backdrop. Sarah waved the developing image, then tucked it into her notebook. Proof of beginning. Something to measure against. The baby shifted restlessly, prompting Sarah to sit on the porch steps. 6 miles to the nearest neighbor, 15 to town. No cell reception. The reality of her isolation pressed against her chest, momentarily stealing her breath. What have I done? The question hung in the mountain air, unanswered. A sudden rustling drew her attention to the tree line. A doe and fawn emerged cautiously, regarding Sarah with equal parts curiosity and wariness. They held her gaze for a long moment before continuing their delicate passage across what had once been her grandmother's garden. Sarah raised the camera again, capturing their elegant forms. The mechanical click startled them back into the forest, whitetails flashing in retreat. When the image developed, Sarah studied the peaceful scene, so different from her previous life of traffic noise and neighbor disputes. The contrast was jarring yet somehow reassuring. Inside, she spread her grandmother's journals across the kitchen table, pages yellowed but filled with precise handwriting. Instructions for winterizing pipes, notes on local plants, diagrams for roof repair using materials found on property. Her grandmother had done this alone too. Built, maintained, survived. Sarah ran her fingers over the handwritten pages, feeling a connection bridging decades. The enormity of the task ahead remained daunting, but something else flickered alongside the fear now, a fragile sense of possibility. "We can do this," she told her unborn child, one hand resting on her belly while the other held the developing image of their new beginning. One day at a time. The hardware store in town smelled of sawdust and metal, a scent both foreign and oddly comforting to Sarah. She clutched her carefully prepared list, overwhelmed by aisles of unfamiliar tools and materials. Men in worn flannels and work boots navigated the space with confident familiarity that made her pregnancy and inexperience feel all the more conspicuous. "Help you find something?" The clerk's weathered face creased with friendly suspicion, his eyes flickering briefly to her belly. "Roofing supplies," Sarah answered, straightening her shoulders. "And whatever these are," she pointed to items in her grandmother's handwriting she'd copied but didn't understand. The man squinted at her list. "Flashing, seam sealer, galvanized nails." He looked up, reassessing her. "Roofwork's not really a one-person job, especially not for someone in your condition." Sarah felt heat rise to her face. "I'm stronger than I look," not doubting that. "Just stating facts." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Tell you what, my wife works Thursday afternoons. She handles our special orders desk. Might have some insights for your situation?" Sarah nodded, swallowing her pride. "Thursday, then." She left with only basic supplies, a hammer, utility knife, and a tarp, large enough to cover the worst section of roof. The expense had been more than expected, leaving her budget precariously thin. "One problem at a time," she reminded herself. Back at the cabin, Sarah dragged the wooden ladder from the shed and positioned it against the porch roof, the lowest section and most accessible for her first attempt. The rungs creaked ominously under her weight. 3 attempts later, she finally managed to haul herself and a corner of the tarp onto the gently sloping surface. The rotted shingles felt spongy beneath her hands, and the knowledge that only deteriorated wood separated her from a 15-foot fall sent her heart racing. "This was stupid," she muttered. Inching forward on hands and knees, the baby shifted suddenly, throwing her slightly off balance. Sarah froze, taking deliberate breaths until the moment of vertigo passed. This was definitely not in any pregnancy manual. The temporary repair took 3 hours, securing the tarp with found bricks and scavenged boards, her hands growing raw and blistered from the work. When she finally descended the ladder, her back screamed in protest and her fingertips had lost sensation. Inside, Sarah ran her abused hands under cold water, wincing. Tomorrow would bring new aches to join today's collection. Rummaging through kitchen drawers, she found a pair of leather work gloves, stiff with age and far too large for her hands. Her grandfather's, perhaps. She slipped them on anyway, the excess material folding awkwardly at her fingertips. That evening, by lantern light, she used a kitchen knife to trim the fingers of the gloves, then awkwardly stitched the excess leather closed with dental floss. The result was imperfect but functional, like everything else about this new life. The next morning brought rain, a gentle but persistent shower that tested her tarp installation. Sarah moved through the cabin, placing buckets under the worst leaks, but noted with satisfaction that her covered section remained relatively dry. A small victory. When the rain subsided, she ventured to the overgrown garden plot, gloves protecting her tender hands. The ground was stubborn, rocks hiding beneath the surface of what had likely once been productive soil. Each shovelful required full-body effort, her urban muscles protesting this unfamiliar labor. By sunset, she had cleared only a small section, perhaps 4 feet square. Sarah sat back on her heels, sweaty and exhausted, staring at the pitiful patch of turned earth. In the city, she could have ordered a week's groceries with 2 clicks. Here she would be lucky to grow a handful of vegetables before winter. The thought should have been defeating. Instead, Sarah found herself smiling at the absurdity. She peeled off the modified gloves, noting the dirt ground into the stitching. No longer grandfather's pristine tools, but now uniquely hers. Shaped by her labor. That night, muscles aching in ways she'd never experienced, Sarah added to her growing journal. Next to a list of newly learned terms, flashing, joists, soffits, she sketched a small pair of hands wearing oversized gloves. Beneath it she wrote, "Becoming capable is painful." She fell asleep reading her grandmother's notes on garden soil preparation. The modified gloves resting on her nightstand like a promise. There would be blisters, there would be failures, but her hands were growing stronger. Tomorrow they would try again. Sarah's ankles had begun to swell, an uncomfortable reminder of her advancing pregnancy. 7 months now, the baby growing more active daily, communicating through kicks and rolls that sometimes took her breath away. She propped her feet on a stack of cushions, thumbing through her grandmother's plant journal, its pages filled with detailed drawings and notes on local flora. The knock at the door startled her. Visitors were rare enough to be concerning. An elderly woman stood on the porch, silver hair escaping from a practical braid, her weathered face a map of mountain living. She carried a cloth-covered basket and wore an expression that suggested she was exactly where she meant to be. "You're Edie's granddaughter," the woman stated rather than asked. "I'm Eleanor Blackburn. Your grandmother's friend? Saw smoke from your chimney these past weeks. Thought I'd check who was up here." Sarah hesitated only briefly before inviting her in. Isolation had made conversation a forgotten luxury. 7 months along, I'd guess, Eleanor noted, eyeing Sarah's belly as she set her basket on the kitchen table. "Boy or girl?" "I don't know." "Wanted to be surprised." Eleanor nodded approval. "Some things shouldn't be rushed." She glanced around the cabin, noting the repairs and remaining work with the critical eye of someone who understood mountain living. "You've been busy, trying to beat winter," Sarah admitted. Eleanor unwrapped her basket, revealing jars of preserved vegetables and a small wooden box with a sliding lid. "Mountain welcome gifts." "And this was your grandmother's. Thought you might need it now." The wooden box was beautifully crafted, its surface smooth from years of handling. Inside, small compartments housed dried herbs, each section labeled in her grandmother's precise handwriting. "She made teas," Eleanor explained. "Medicinal mostly. Good for what ails you." She pointed to different compartments. "This eases water retention. This for sleep. This for digestion." Sarah ran her fingers over the herbs. "I wouldn't know where to begin. That's why I'm here. Put your shoes on. We're going walking." Despite her swollen ankles, Sarah followed Eleanor into the surrounding forest. The older woman moved with surprising agility, stopping periodically to point out plants Sarah would have overlooked. Wild ginger, good for nausea. Eleanor demonstrated how to properly harvest the roots. "This here's yarrow, healing. And over there, see those berries? Don't eat those. Similar ones nearby are fine, but these will have you seeing things that aren't there. Sarah absorbed the information hungrily, collecting samples in a small pouch. The knowledge felt essential, connecting her to this land in ways her city life never could have offered. "Your grandmother learned all this from my mother," Eleanor said as they rested on a fallen log, "then taught me new things she discovered herself. Mountain women have always had to know how to care for themselves and their young. Were you born up here?" Sarah asked. "Born in that cabin just over the ridge. Delivered by my grandmother because the doctor couldn't make it through the snow." Eleanor smiled at Sarah's expression. "Don't worry. These mountains have witnessed thousands of births. Yours won't be the first or the last." Back at the cabin, Eleanor demonstrated how to dry and store the collected plants. She brewed a tea from the swelling reduction herbs, the aroma filling the kitchen with earthy comfort. "Sip it slowly," she instructed. "Nature's not meant to be rushed." The tea tasted bitter but not unpleasant. Sarah felt a connection to her grandmother through the familiar ritual, imagining her hands performing these same actions decades earlier. "How did you know I was here?" Sarah asked as Eleanor prepared to leave. "Mountain has ways of sharing news." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Besides, Frank at the hardware store mentioned a pregnant city woman buying roofing materials. Wasn't hard to figure who that might be." After Eleanor left, Sarah organized her newly gathered herbs in the wooden box, adding labels with her own observations. She placed it on the kitchen windowsill where morning light would touch it first. That evening, her ankles noticeably less swollen, Sarah walked the perimeter of her property with new awareness. Plants she'd previously dismissed as weeds now revealed themselves as potential medicine. She harvested wild mint growing near the spring, adding it to her collection. The baby shifted, a rolling movement that made her smile. "Learning together," she murmured, one hand on her belly while the other held sprigs of mint. "This is wild mint, for tea and upset stomachs. Your great-grandmother knew these things. Now we will too." Later, sipping mint tea by the wood stove, Sarah added to her growing journal, sketching plants alongside repair notes. The city felt increasingly distant, its conveniences replaced by something more fundamental. Here, healing didn't come from pharmacies and doctors' offices, but from the land itself, freely given to those who learned its language. For the first night in weeks, Sarah slept deeply, without the backache that had become her constant companion. The wooden tea box, standing guard on her nightstand, like a promise of better days ahead. Water pooled around Sarah's feet as she frantically twisted the pipe wrench, trying to stop the spray shooting from beneath the sink. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face, shoulders aching from contorting her pregnant body into the cramped cabinet space. "Clockwise tightens, and counterclockwise loosens," she muttered, repeating the plumbing mantra that had become her recent prayer. The connection finally caught, the spray reduced to a steady drip. Progress, not perfection. Sarah backed awkwardly out of the cabinet, her 8-month belly making every movement a negotiation. The kitchen floor resembled a shallow pond, her sweatpants soaked to the knees. She surveyed the disaster with a mixture of frustration and unexpected humor. "At least we know where the low spots in the floor are now," she told her unborn child, reaching for a towel. 3 days into restoring the cabin's water system, Sarah had discovered that plumbing had a language all its own, one that seemed deliberately designed to confuse beginners. PVC versus PEX, thread seal versus pipe dope. Each mistake resulted in leaks that made the previous state seem preferable. After mopping the floor, Sarah retreated to her grandmother's roll-top desk, where she'd been collecting all the cabin documentation she could find. Among electric bills and property tax notices, she had discovered something extraordinary yesterday. Large sheets of paper carefully folded and tucked into an architect's portfolio. She unfolded them again now, spreading the yellowed pages across the desk. Hand-drawn blueprints of the cabin, not from some hired professional, but in her grandmother's distinctive writing. Every detail meticulously documented, framing, electrical, plumbing, with calculations in the margins and notes about materials. Sarah had assumed her grandfather built the cabin, or perhaps it had predated both of them. But these drawings told a different story. Her grandmother hadn't merely lived here. She had designed this space, built it with her own hands. One page detailed the spring-fed water system, how pressure worked without electricity, how to divert water during freezing temperatures. The clever gravity-based filtration system. Sarah studied it with newfound appreciation, noting where her recent repairs had deviated from the original design. The baby kicked vigorously, as if sharing her excitement at the discovery. "She built this," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the precise lines. All of it. The revelation shifted something fundamental in Sarah's understanding of both the cabin and herself. She wasn't just occupying a space her grandmother had owned. She was continuing a legacy of female independence and capability that had seemed so foreign just months ago. Armed with the blueprints, Sarah returned to the water system with renewed determination. She followed the line from the spring, clearing debris that had accumulated over years of neglect. The original cedar catchment box her grandmother had designed remained remarkably intact, needing only minor repairs to function again. By sunset, Sarah had restored the primary water line. She turned the main valve slowly, listening to the pipes shudder and groan as water flowed through the system for the first time in years. At the kitchen sink she waited, holding her breath until water, clear, cold mountain water, flowed freely from the tap. The simple miracle of running water brought tears to her eyes. That night, she studied the electrical blueprint by lantern light. Her grandmother had designed a hybrid system, part conventional electricity, part solar panels that had been revolutionary for their time. Most of the panels still stood on the south-facing slope, though years of weather had taken their toll. Sarah made notes on what components would need replacing, resources she would need to gather. The expense would be considerable, but electricity meant security, particularly with winter approaching and a newborn soon to arrive. She fell asleep at the desk, dreaming of her grandmother, not the elderly woman she remembered from childhood visits, but as she must have been decades earlier. Young, determined, drawing these very blueprints by lamplight, envisioning a home that would sustain her through decades of mountain seasons. Morning brought renewed purpose. Sarah gathered tools and headed to the solar array, blueprint in hand. The positioning had been precisely calculated to maximize exposure throughout the year, accounting for the mountain's shadow patterns. Several panels were cracked beyond repair, but others needed only cleaning and reconnection. Sarah worked methodically, referencing the blueprint when uncertain. By mid-afternoon, she had restored enough function to power the cabin's basic needs: lights in the main rooms, the small refrigerator, enough outlets for essentials. When darkness fell, Sarah flipped the breaker switch with ceremonial solemnity. Light flooded the main room, not the harsh fluorescence of city life, but a warm, gentle illumination that seemed to honor the cabin's character. She placed her hand on the blueprint, a wordless thank you to the woman who had made this possible, whose vision continued to shelter her granddaughter decades later. In that moment, Sarah felt less alone than she had in months. The blueprint wasn't just a technical document. It was a conversation across generations. Her grandmother's hand still guiding her through the challenges ahead. The town of Pine Ridge consisted of exactly 3 streets intersecting around a modest central square. Sarah parked her car in front of the clinic, a converted Victorian house with a discreet medical symbol on the mailbox. She'd postponed this visit twice already, but at 8.5 months, even she couldn't deny the necessity anymore. The waiting room held 2 other patients, an elderly man with an oxygen tank and a teenage girl whose eyes remained fixed on her phone. Sarah signed in, uncomfortable with the curious glances from the receptionist. Sarah Parker, a woman in her 50s, appeared, clipboard in hand. Her no-nonsense demeanor was softened by laugh lines around her eyes. "I'm Dr. Harper. Come on back. The examination room was surprisingly well equipped for such a small practice. Sarah answered the standard questions about symptoms and movements, while Dr. Harper measured and prodded. "Blood pressure's excellent," the doctor noted with approval. "Better than most of my pregnant patients. Baby's position is good too." She paused, studying Sarah more personally than medically. "You're Edie Parker's granddaughter staying at her cabin?" Sarah nodded, unsurprised that news had traveled. "For almost 4 months now." Dr. Harper made a note in the chart. "And you're planning to stay through delivery?" "That's the plan." The doctor's expression remained neutral. "The cabin's, 15 miles from town? On mountain roads." When Sarah nodded, Dr. Harper continued. "Winter's coming. Those roads get impassable sometimes. You have a contingency plan?" "I'm preparing for home birth if necessary. Eleanor Blackburn has been helping me." "Eleanor?" Dr. Harper's expression softened noticeably. "That's good. She's delivered more babies around here than I have. Still, I'd sleep better knowing you had backup." She scribbled on a prescription pad. "Mary Winters, local midwife who works with my practice. Best of both worlds, traditional knowledge with medical training." Sarah accepted the card reluctantly. "I'm managing fine on my own." "Nobody manages completely on their own up here," Dr. Harper replied, not unkindly. "Not even your grandmother did." "That's not how mountains work." Outside the clinic, Sarah stood in the town square, the doctor's words echoing uncomfortably. Her fierce independence had become both shield and identity since the divorce. Accepting help felt dangerously close to admitting failure. The general store's windows displayed Halloween decorations, though October was barely underway. Sarah entered, needing supplies she couldn't produce herself: salt, flour, prenatal vitamins. Mr. Jenkins nodded in recognition from behind the counter. "Miss Parker, how's the cabin coming along?" "Getting there." She placed her items on the counter, calculating the remaining cash in her wallet. The total came to $3 more than she had. "Put the vitamins on your tab," Mr. Jenkins suggested, bagging the items. "I don't need a tab." His weathered face remained impassive. "Your grandmother kept 130 years. Paid every penny. Parker credit's good here." Sarah's protest died unspoken. She needed the vitamins. "Thank you," she managed, accepting the bag with awkward gratitude. The post office occupied a corner of the general store. A stack of mail awaited her, mostly forwarded bills, and a thick envelope from her ex-husband's lawyer. Sarah stared at it. The city and its complications suddenly too close for comfort. She tucked the envelope into her bag unopened. Whatever demands it contained could wait another day. The town library beckoned across the square, a single-room building with established 1908 carved above its door. Inside, the scent of old books and furniture polish created an atmosphere of timeless tranquility. Sarah browsed absently, finding comfort in the familiar ritual from her previous life as an English teacher. Looking for anything specific? The librarian approached, gray-haired, spectacled, exactly as librarians should be. "Just browsing?" "We have a decent parenting section," the woman offered, gesturing to a corner shelf. "Not extensive, but practical." Sarah nodded thanks and found herself drawn to the suggested section. Most titles focused on conventional child-rearing, but one caught her attention: Mountain Mothering, Traditions of Appalachian Childcare. She added it to her growing stack. At the checkout desk, the librarian processed her selections efficiently. "New library card?" she asked, reaching for a form. "Just visiting," Sarah demurred. The librarian's eyebrows rose slightly. 8 months pregnant and just visiting Eleanor's old cabin in winter? "Sounds like staying to me." She pushed the form across the counter. "No charge for residence." The word resident stuck in Sarah's mind as she completed the form. Was that what she was becoming? The idea was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. "There's a story hour for little ones on Thursday mornings," the librarian mentioned, handing over the new card. "For when the time comes," Sarah's throat tightened unexpectedly. The simple assumption that she would still be here, that her child would become part of this community, felt like both pressure and invitation. Driving back toward the cabin, Sarah's thoughts remained tangled. The unopened legal letter seemed to burn in her bag, while the midwife's contact information, a new library card, represented conflicting futures. The appointment card for her next prenatal visit sat on the passenger seat, a small rectangle demanding decisions. The mountain road steepened, each curve drawing her further from town and back to the isolation she'd chosen. Yet Dr. Harper's words followed her. Nobody manages completely on their own up here. Not even your grandmother did. As the cabin came into view, Sarah felt the now familiar mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had built something here, not just repairs to a physical structure, but the beginning of a life. The question remaining was whether that life would include others or remain deliberately solitary. She placed the appointment card on the refrigerator, securing it with a magnet, a small concession to connection in her otherwise self-contained world. The smallest room in the cabin had once been her grandmother's sewing space. Sarah stood in the doorway, envisioning its transformation into a nursery. Dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon light streaming through the window, illuminating peeling wallpaper and the ancient Singer sewing machine still stationed in the corner. "What do you think?" Sarah asked her belly, rubbing the spot where a tiny foot or elbow protruded. "It's small, but it's got good light." She'd been collecting items for weeks now, a sturdy rocking chair rescued from the shed and refinished, a dresser with one slightly wobbly drawer, a small bookshelf she'd built herself using scrap lumber. The centerpiece remained elusive, though. A proper crib. Sarah swept the floor methodically, then scrubbed the windows until they gleamed. The wallpaper, faded yellow with tiny blue flowers, was beyond saving, peeling in long strips from the walls. She spent the afternoon carefully removing it, revealing the original pine boards beneath. Better, she decided, running her hand over the exposed wood. More honest. In the attic, searching for usable furniture, Sarah discovered a cedar chest she'd missed in previous explorations. The hinges protested when she lifted the lid, releasing the scent of mothballs and memory. Inside lay neatly folded baby clothes, some hand-sewn, others clearly purchased. A handwritten note in her grandmother's script explained, "For Sarah's future children, should she have them." Her throat tightened. How had her grandmother known? The clothing, yellowed but intact, spanned from newborn to toddler sizes. Sarah lifted each piece carefully, marveling at the tiny proportions, the delicate stitching. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a small wooden cradle, disassembled but complete with hardware. The note attached read, "Built for Sarah when she was born." Assembly instructions inside. Sarah carried the pieces downstairs reverently. By evening, the cradle stood assembled in the center of the nursery-to-be, its curved wooden sides smooth from generations of use. She rocked it gently, watching shadows play across its surface, imagining her own mother once lying within its embrace. The bedding posed a different challenge. The foam padding seemed safe enough after airing, but the fabric coverings had deteriorated beyond use. Sarah inventoried the cabin's fabric resources: kitchen curtains too worn to salvage, an old tablecloth with stubborn stains, several of her grandmother's dresses still hanging in the bedroom closet. Eleanor's voice echoed in her memory from their last visit. "Nothing gets wasted in the mountains. Everything transforms." Transformation. That word had taken on layers of meaning in recent months. The cabin transforming from ruin to home, her body changing with pregnancy, her very identity shifting from urban professional to whatever she was becoming. Sarah laid the fabrics across the floor, studying colors and textures. Using scissors from her grandmother's sewing kit, she began cutting squares, some from the blue-checked kitchen curtains, others from the faded floral dress her grandmother had worn in Sarah's earliest memories. Her first attempts at stitching were clumsy, fingers struggling to remember skills briefly learned in middle school home economics. But by the third night, a rhythm emerged, the repetitive motion of needle and thread, becoming almost meditative as she worked by lamplight. "I'm making you a quilt," she told her unborn child. "It's not pretty in the traditional sense, but it's us, pieces of the past coming together for your future. The quilt grew slowly, incorporating remnants from around the cabin, each square a different memory or story. When she ran out of fabric, Sarah ventured into her own limited wardrobe, cutting squares from the maternity dress she'd worn to sign her divorce papers. Transformation indeed. During the day, she continued practical preparations. A changing table fashioned from a repurposed desk. A mobile made from polished stones and driftwood collected from the nearby stream. Suspended above the cradle to catch the morning light one afternoon. Feeling the baby shift position lower in her pelvis, a sign the book's called dropping, Sarah planted sunflower seeds in a narrow bed outside the nursery window. They won't bloom before you're born, she explained to her belly, but they'll be there for your first summer, tall enough to peek in and watch you grow. The nursery took shape around the quilt's progress, gaining character with each small addition. A shelf lined with pine cones and interesting rocks she'd collected on her walks. A small bookshelf slowly filling with volumes from the library, not just practical baby guides, but fairy tales and wilderness stories she wanted to share someday. On the wall above the cradle, Sarah hung a simple decoration, a branch arranged in a circle, with small treasures she'd found woven into it. Feathers, dried wildflowers, a perfect maple leaf preserved between wax paper. The evening she completed the final stitches on the quilt. Sarah sat in the rocking chair examining her work. The pattern had no conventional design, following intuition rather than instruction. Some squares aligned perfectly, others joined at slight angles, creating an undulating topography of fabric memory. She spread it over the cradle. The colors softened in the lamplight. Blues from curtains, greens from her hiking shirt, floral patterns from her grandmother's dresses, all connected by her own inexpert but determined stitches. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Sarah felt truly prepared. Not because the nursery was perfect, it wasn't, by any conventional standard, but because she had created something out of nothing, transformed discarded pieces into protection, made warmth from memories. She folded the quilt carefully and placed it in the cradle, ready for its tiny occupant. Her hand lingered on the fabric, feeling the different textures beneath her fingers. Rough denim beside delicate cotton, sturdy canvas against silky dress material. Like her new life, it shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Held together by necessity and determination more than skill. Almost ready for you now, she whispered, both to the room and the child within her. Sarah woke to unusual stillness. The persistent mountain birdsong that typically accompanied dawn was absent, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against the cabin windows. Outside, the sky had transformed overnight from clear blue to a threatening pewter gray. Clouds hanging unnaturally low over the ridgeline. She felt it in her joints first, a subtle change in barometric pressure that made her lower back ache more than usual. The baby sensed it too, unusually active as Sarah prepared breakfast. "Restless today, aren't you?" she murmured, one hand on her belly as she peered through the window. The trees at the forest edge stood motionless, as if holding their breath. The old battery-powered radio on her kitchen counter crackled with the morning forecast. Severe thunderstorm warning for Pike County and surrounding mountain areas. Potential for flash flooding in low-lying regions. Residents advised to secure outdoor items and prepare for possible power outages. Sarah stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. The air felt dense, electrically charged. In the distance, the faintest rumble of thunder traveled through the mountains like a whispered warning. She surveyed her property with newly critical eyes. The woodpile needed covering. The rain barrel should be emptied to accommodate fresh water. The generator she'd finally repaired last week would need testing before the storm hit. Working methodically, Sarah secured everything that could become dangerous in high winds. The physical effort was becoming increasingly difficult at nearly 9 months pregnant. Her center of gravity shifted dramatically forward. Simple tasks like bending or lifting now required strategic planning. By midday, the storm announced its approach with more insistent thunder. Wind had begun to rise, making the treetops dance in rhythmic waves across the mountainside. Sarah completed her final preparations, filling every available container with fresh water and checking the flashlights. On her grandmother's desk, she assembled what she'd come to think of as her emergency binder, a collection of information she might need if things went badly. Medical instructions for various scenarios. The quickest route to town if roads were partially blocked. Contact frequencies for emergency services. Information on handling power outages or fallen trees. Some pages were from her grandmother's files, others printed during trips to the library, and many written in Sarah's increasingly confident and knowledge gained through months of mountain living. The first fat raindrops hit the metal roof just as she added her latest addition to the binder, basically information on emergency childbirth just in case. The baby wasn't due for 3 more weeks, but mountain weather had its own schedule, unconcerned with human timing, as if in response to her thoughts. A sharp contraction tightened across her abdomen, not labor. She was fairly certain, just her body's practice for the real event. Still, the timing was unsettling. The storm arrived in earnest by late afternoon. Rain hammered against the cabin in horizontal sheets driven by wind that howled through the pine forest. The world outside the windows had disappeared behind a grey curtain of water. Occasional flashes of lightning, providing strobe-like glimpses of thrashing trees. Sarah moved through the cabin, checking for leaks. Her roof repairs had held in previous rains, but nothing had tested them like this onslaught. A small trickle appeared in the far corner of the main room, but the nursery remained dry, a relief that made her shoulders sag with gratitude. The lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to darkness. Sarah lit the kerosene lamps she'd positioned strategically throughout the cabin, their warm glow creating islands of light amid the storm's chaos. The wood stove radiated steady heat, its cast iron bulk providing both warmth and comfort. A tremendous crack split the air, louder than thunder, more immediate. Sarah rushed to the window in time to see a massive pine crashing down across her cleared garden space, missing the corner of the cabin by mere feet. The impact shook the foundation, rattling dishes in the kitchen cupboards. For the first time since arriving at the mountain, true fear gripped her. Not the anxious uncertainty that had accompanied her early days, but visceral fear for her safety and her child's. The cabin suddenly seemed fragile, the months of repairs inadequate against nature's raw power. The baby responded to her surge of adrenaline with frantic movement. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, taking deliberate breaths until her heart rate steadied. "We're okay," she whispered, unsure whether she was reassuring the baby or herself. The cabins held through worse. Another contraction tightened across her abdomen, stronger than the last. Sarah glanced at her watch, noting the time. Probably still Braxton Hicks' practice contractions, but worth monitoring. The storm raged throughout the night. Sarah dozed fitfully in the rocking chair, reluctant to retreat to the bedroom, with trees falling unpredictably. The emergency binder lay open on her lap, pages illuminated by lamplight as she periodically reviewed information on distinguishing false labor from true contractions. By dawn, the storm had spent the worst of its fury, settling into a steady rain. Sarah stepped carefully onto the porch, surveying the damage in early morning light. Branches and debris littered the clearing. The garden lay flattened beneath the fallen pine. Part of the porch railing had splintered under the impact of a projectile she couldn't identify, but the cabin stood firm. The roof had held, except for that one minor leak. The walls remained square against the foundation, windows intact despite the wind's battering. Sarah placed one hand on the solid wooden doorframe, feeling the cabin's stubborn resilience beneath her fingers. Like her, it had bent without breaking, transformed by pressure rather than destroyed by it. She returned inside to add a new note to her emergency binder. Cabin withstood Class 3 thunderstorm, August 15th. Minimal structural damage. Porch railing requires replacement. Garden destroyed but can be replanted. We survived. The we wasn't accidental. For the first time, Sarah fully understood that she wasn't alone in this journey, hadn't been for months now. The aftermath of the storm revealed damage beyond Sarah's initial assessment. 3 massive trees had fallen across her access road, completely blocking the path to town. The garden lay devastated beneath another fallen pine. Debris littered the clearing, and the roof had developed 2 new leaks despite her previous repairs. Sarah stood amid the chaos, mentally calculating what she could reasonably accomplish alone. 9 months pregnant now, her body imposed limitations she couldn't ignore. Simply bending to pick up fallen branches left her breathless, back aching in protest. The sound of vehicles approaching pulled her from these thoughts. A caravan of 3 pickup trucks navigated the narrow forest path that circumvented her blocked driveway. Eleanor's faded blue Ford led the procession, followed by trucks Sarah didn't recognize. "Thought you might need some hands," Eleanor called as she emerged from the cab. Behind her, 5 men and 2 women unloaded equipment from the truck beds, chainsaws, ropes, toolboxes. Sarah felt an immediate, visceral resistance. "I was just getting started," she said, gesturing vaguely at the single branch she'd managed to drag aside. Eleanor fixed her with a knowing look. "Mountain storm cleanup isn't one-person work, especially not in your condition. Besides, road needs clearing or nobody gets through. Not even a midwife if that baby decides today's the day." Before Sarah could protest further, the volunteers had dispersed across the property, assessing damage with practiced efficiency. A grey-haired man in well-worn Carhartt coveralls approached the fallen trees on the driveway, sizing them up with an expert eye. "Walter knows trees better than anyone," Eleanor explained. 30 years with the Forest Service. Walter nodded a silent greeting, then extended a chainsaw toward Sarah. "You know how to run one of these?" She shook her head. "Good time to learn. Everyone should know how." His voice was gruff but not unkind. "I'll clear the big stuff, but there's smaller work needs doing too." Sarah started to explain that she couldn't possibly accept their help, the words forming automatically from pride long cultivated, but stopped herself. The baby had dropped lower last week. Her due date loomed close. Practicality needed to override pride. "Thank you," she managed instead, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. The community worked with coordinated precision, requiring minimal communication. Walter and 2 younger men tackled the fallen trees, the buzz of chainsaws punctuating the morning air. The women focused on the cabin itself, one applying temporary patches to the roof while another reinforced the damaged porch railing. Sarah found herself assigned to Eleanor's supervision, sorting salvageable garden materials from debris. "Spring planting will come sooner than you think," Eleanor remarked, showing Sarah how to identify which plants might recover. "Nature's resilient when given half a chance." By midday, the transformation was remarkable. The access road had been cleared, damaged trees safely removed from threatening positions near the cabin, the porch rebuilt stronger than before. Someone had repaired her rain collection system. Adding an improved filter, Eleanor explained, would keep the leaves and critters out better. The women had brought food, a practical gesture that recognized physical labor required fuel. Sarah found herself seated on the porch steps between Eleanor and Walter, accepting a sandwich and listening to conversations that flowed around her. These people knew each other's rhythms, their shared history evident in casual references to past storms and communal projects. 9 was worse, Walter remarked between bites. "Remember, Johnson Place got split clean in half by that lightning-struck oak. They rebuilt better, though," added a woman Sarah now knew as Barbara, the local elementary school teacher. "That's Mountain Way. Each storm teaches something." Sarah absorbed their casual resilience, so different from the isolated self-sufficiency she'd been cultivating. When they spoke of neighbors, it wasn't with the polite distance she'd known in the city, but with the intimate knowledge of people whose lives intersected in fundamental ways. As the work crew prepared to leave, Sarah struggled to express her gratitude. Words seemed insufficient against the physical reality of their help. Walter approached as she stood awkwardly by the newly cleared driveway. "Keep this," he said, offering the smaller of the chainsaws. "It's my spare. Learn to use it before winter. You'll need it for fallen branches after snow." "I can't Sarah began. Not giving it to you, Walter clarified. Loaning it. Bring it back when it needs sharpening. I'll show you how to do that too. The distinction was significant. Not charity, but shared resources. An ongoing relationship rather than a completed transaction. Sarah accepted the chainsaw with new understanding. Next month's community dinner is at the Wilsons' place, Eleanor mentioned as she collected empty food containers. Bring something if you can, nothing if you can't. Either way, come. After they departed, Sarah stood in the clearing, the borrowed chainsaw at her feet. The property looked better than it had before the storm. The collapsed shed she'd been meaning to clear away was gone. The garden had been salvaged where possible and prepared for spring replanting. She'd spent months believing self-reliance meant doing everything alone, measuring her worth by her independence. Now she understood what her grandmother had known all along, that mountain life required a different definition of self-sufficiency. Not isolation, but interdependence. Not pride that refused help, but wisdom that recognized when to accept it. That evening, Sarah added Walter's basic chainsaw instructions to her emergency binder, then wrote a new entry, community members to contact in emergency, with names and cabin locations carefully mapped. No longer strangers but neighbors, people who expected nothing in return except the knowledge that someday, when they needed help, she would offer the same without hesitation. The unfamiliar sound of tires on gravel pulled Sarah's attention from the tomato seedlings she was transplanting to pots for indoor growing. Few people ventured up her mountain road, especially in a vehicle that purred like an expensive European sedan, rather than the practical trucks her neighbors drove. She straightened with effort, one hand supporting her lower back, and turned toward the approaching car. The sleek black BMW seemed alien against the rugged landscape, like a chess piece mistakenly dropped onto a hiking trail. When the driver emerged, Sarah felt reality tilt sideways. James looked exactly as she remembered. Tailored charcoal suit, expertly styled hair, the confident posture of someone who expected the world to accommodate his presence. Only his expression revealed discomfort as he surveyed the cabin and surrounding wilderness with poorly concealed distaste. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, not moving to greet him. "You haven't been responding to your lawyer." His voice carried across the clearing, familiar yet utterly out of place. "There are documents that need your signature. You drove 6 hours to deliver paperwork." James straightened his jacket, a nervous gesture she recognized from their marriage. "I was concerned. Nobody's heard from you in months. I've been busy." Sarah gestured vaguely at the cabin and surrounding property. Conscious suddenly of her appearance, faded overalls streaked with dirt, hair pulled back in a practical braid, hands calloused from work. A stark contrast to the polished woman she'd been in their shared life. "So I see." His gaze lingered on her heavily pregnant form. "May I come in?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded curtly. The cabin was her territory now. She could allow this brief invasion without surrendering her hard-won peace. Inside, James seemed too large for the space, his city presence overwhelming the rustic simplicity she'd created. He studied the repairs and improvements with the critical eye of someone accustomed to professional craftsmanship. "You did all this?" Skepticism tinged his question every bit. Pride strengthened her voice. "What paperwork needs signing?" James withdrew an envelope from his leather briefcase. "There's been a development with the property settlement. My lawyer believes the initial division was inequitable given the circumstances. The circumstances being that you had an affair and wanted out." Sarah kept her tone matter-of-fact, surprised by her own calm. The pain that had once accompanied these words had faded to a dull acknowledgement of history. "That's a simplification." James placed the documents on the kitchen table. "We're requesting an adjustment to the financial terms, given your situation." "My situation is exactly what I've chosen." Sarah left the envelope untouched. "I don't need or want changes to our agreement." James's gaze swept across the cabin with deliberate assessment. "Sarah, be reasonable. You're living in a dilapidated cabin in the middle of nowhere, about to have a baby alone. This isn't exactly responsible planning." The condescension in his tone ignited something fierce within her. "Take a closer look, James. This dilapidated cabin has withstood 70 years of mountain winters. I've repaired every inch with my own hands. The roof doesn't leak, the plumbing works, and there's enough firewood to last until spring." She moved around the small space, pointing out details he'd missed. "Solar panels provide electricity. The garden will supply most of our food next season. I have arrangements with neighbors for winter emergencies." James seemed taken aback by her vehemence. "That's all very pioneering of you, but a child needs stability, proper schools, medical care." "A child needs a parent who's present and whole," Sarah interrupted. "Not one who's miserable in a luxury apartment, working 80 hours a week to maintain appearances. Is that what you think I am?" His voice rose slightly. "While you're out here playing mountain woman, I've been dealing with the real consequences of our separation." Sarah noticed him absently touch his pocket, a gesture she recognized from their marriage. It was where he'd kept her wedding ring after she'd returned it, carrying it like a talisman for months after she'd moved out. The realization that he might still be carrying it stunned her momentarily. "The consequences were your choice," she said finally. "Just as this is mine." She rested her hands protectively over her belly. "I'm not signing anything today. You can leave the papers. My lawyer will review them." "This stubbornness isn't helping anyone," James persisted. "Think practically. What happens when the baby comes? When winter isolates you up here? When you run out of money?" "I've thought of nothing but practicalities for months." Sarah moved toward the door, a clear dismissal. "I appreciate your concern, but it's misplaced. We're going to be fine." James remained seated, frustration evident in his rigid posture. "This isn't what I wanted for you." "It's not about what you want anymore." The simple truth of this statement resonated through the cabin. It hasn't been for some time now. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the mountain, wind through pine needles, a woodpecker's distant tapping, the subtle creaking of the cabin settling into itself. "At least tell me when the baby is due," James said finally, his tone softer. "Any day now." Sarah felt the child shift as if in confirmation. "And you're really doing this alone?" "The birth? I have a midwife. Neighbors on call. I'm not alone." The statement carried meaning beyond its surface. When James finally stood to leave, he seemed diminished somehow, less certain than when he'd arrived. At the door, he turned back. "If you need anything, I'll manage." Sarah cut him off gently but firmly. "I always do." She watched from the porch as he returned to his sleek car, so incongruous against the wilderness backdrop. As he reached for the door handle, she saw him withdraw something from his pocket, glance at it briefly, then return it before driving away. The flash of gold confirmed her suspicion. The wedding band she'd returned months ago, still carried like a possibility he couldn't relinquish. Sarah stood on the porch long after the sound of his engine had faded, one hand resting on her belly. The encounter had been a collision of worlds, her past and present meeting briefly before continuing on divergent paths. James had come seeking the woman he'd left behind, but that version of Sarah no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, more certain, shaped by solitude and labor into a woman he'd never truly known. The documents remained unopened on her kitchen table. They could wait. Today belonged to the seedlings that needed transplanting, the coming baby who needed a mother present and whole. The future she was building one repair at a time. The garden flourished under the height of summer sun, transforming from the storm-ravaged plot of earlier weeks into a vibrant tapestry of green. Sarah moved slowly between the rows, her movements deliberate as she navigated her heavily pregnant form through narrow pathways. The baby had dropped noticeably lower, creating new pressure that made walking a conscious effort. Her fingers traced the glossy leaves of tomato plants heavy with fruit just beginning to blush red. Nearby, zucchini vines sprawled beyond their designated spaces, yellow flowers promising abundance in coming days. The practical herbs, basil, rosemary, thyme, formed a fragrant border that released their scent with each passing breeze. "Look what we've done," she murmured to her belly, one hand supporting her lower back as she surveyed their progress. "Not bad for our first attempt." In her free hand, she carried the leather-bound notebook that had become her garden journal. What had begun as simple notes on planting dates had evolved into a detailed record, observations on which varieties thrived in mountain soil, sketches of unexpected visitors, both insect and animal, measurements of rainfall and growth. Sarah lowered herself carefully onto the wooden bench she'd positioned at the garden's edge. Her due date had officially arrived yesterday, though the midwife had prepared her for the likelihood of going beyond it, especially with first babies. Every morning brought the wondering, would today be the day? Followed by the mixture of relief and impatience when ordinary hours unfolded instead. She opened the journal, reviewing her entries from early spring, when the garden had been nothing but potential and preparation. Those early pages revealed a different Sarah, uncertain about her capabilities, anxious about food security, questioning her decision to attempt self-sufficiency. The handwriting itself told a story, evolving from tight, controlled script to a looser, more confident hand. Today's entry documented her latest harvest: summer squash, green beans, the first ripened tomatoes. She sketched the largest zucchini with quick, sure strokes, noting its weight and the recipes she planned to try. These moments of creative documentation had become a ritual, connecting her to the tangible progress of her mountain life. The letter from her best friend Megan lay between the journal's pages, its enthusiastic acceptance of Sarah's invitation bringing both excitement and nervous anticipation. Soon there would be a witness from her old life, someone who knew the before but not the after. The prospect was both thrilling and daunting. Sarah shifted position, seeking comfort that remained elusive these final pregnancy days. Everything felt temporary, suspended between what had been and what would soon arrive. Even her carefully established routines had adapted to her changing body. Garden work in early mornings, before heat intensified. Rest during midday, evenings spent preparing for the baby's arrival. The cabin reflected this readiness. Birth supplies arranged in the bedroom corner, according to Mary, the midwife's instructions. Tiny clothes washed and folded in the bureau. The cradle positioned perfectly to catch morning light. Everything waiting. A flutter of movement pulled her attention toward the forest edge. The doe and her fawn had become regular visitors, growing increasingly bold in their approach. The fawn, no longer the wobbly newborn of early summer, bounded with newfound confidence while its mother watched vigilantly. Sarah remained still, observing their cautious advance toward the garden's edge. Her careful fencing had protected her plantings, but she deliberately left certain areas accessible, planting extra for sharing. The deer had become neighbors of sorts, their presence a reminder that she was the visitor in their ancient territory. In her journal, she sketched their distinctive markings, noting the fawn's growth since previous visits. These records created continuity, a sense of place and belonging that contrasted sharply with her former life's transient connections. The midday sun prompted Sarah to seek the cabin's shade. Standing required a coordinated effort now, a rocking motion to build momentum. Inside, the interior remained pleasantly cool, thanks to her strategic window management, another hard-won lesson from weeks of adjustment. On the kitchen counter, produce from previous days awaited processing. Sarah had been canning steadily, preparing for winter with a determination that occasionally surprised her. Glass jars lined the shelves, tomato sauce, pickled beans, jam from wild berries. Each represented hours of labor and learning, often through frustrating trial and error. Mary, the midwife, was scheduled to visit that afternoon, their twice-weekly check, now that the due date had arrived. Sarah arranged her canning supplies to display her progress, an instinctive gesture of wanting to demonstrate her capability. Mary had become more than a medical provider. She was a connection to mountain knowledge, offering wisdom that extended beyond childbirth to the broader skills of rural living. While waiting, Sarah updated her garden journal with plans for fall planting. The rhythm of seasons had become internal now, her thinking naturally extending beyond immediate needs to future cultivation. Next spring's garden existed already in her mind, expanded, improved by lessons learned, adapted to her new understanding of the land's particular challenges. When Mary's truck rumbled up the drive, Sarah set aside the journal but kept it nearby. After the clinical measurements and examinations, they always shared tea, and Sarah had come to value the midwife's insights on her garden notes. Mary's grandmother had kept similar records for decades, tracking microclimates and plant behaviors specific to their mountain region. "Everything looks perfect," Mary announced after checking the baby's position. "Just a waiting game now. First babies come in their own time." Sarah nodded, having heard this reassurance repeatedly. "I'm ready whenever she is." The she had emerged naturally in recent weeks, an intuition Sarah trusted without medical confirmation. As they settled with tea on the porch, Sarah found herself oddly at peace with this final waiting period. The garden had taught her patience, that growth unfolds according to natural rhythms rather than imposed schedules. Some seeds germinated quickly, others required extended dormancy before emerging. The journal documented both immediate successes and slower transformations. She was no longer the woman who had arrived at the mountain seeking escape. That version of herself seemed distant now, like a character in someone else's story. In her place stood a woman who had planted roots literally and figuratively, whose hands had created sustenance, whose body prepared to bring new life, whose journal documented a transformation more profound than she could have imagined. The garden, like Sarah herself, had weathered storms and emerged stronger, ready for whatever would bloom next. The sharp contraction woke Sarah from deep sleep, a tightening band that wrapped around her abdomen and squeezed with surprising intensity. She gasped, automatically reaching for the bedside clock, 3 to 17 a.m. As she waited for the pain to subside, Sarah practiced the breathing techniques Mary had taught her, focusing on the sensation without fear. When the tightness finally released, she remained still, waiting. False labor had become a frequent visitor these past weeks, her body rehearsing for the main event without commitment. 10 minutes passed without another contraction. Then 20. Sarah sighed and carefully maneuvered herself out of bed. Sleep would remain elusive now. She moved to the kitchen, warming milk with honey and cinnamon, an old remedy from her grandmother's notebooks that seemed to settle both her nerves and the restless baby. Through the window, moonlight silvered the clearing, creating an otherworldly landscape of shadows and light. 8 days past her due date, Sarah fluctuated between impatience and a strange, dreamlike acceptance. Time had taken on elastic properties, stretching endlessly during uncomfortable days, then suddenly compressing when she realized another week had passed. The walking stick stood by the door where she'd left it yesterday, a sturdy oak branch she'd found after the storm, its natural curve fitting perfectly under her hand. Sarah had spent evenings smoothing the wood, carving simple designs into its surface. The process had been meditative, each cut of the knife intentional, the emerging pattern reflecting her internal journey. As dawn approached, Sarah took the walking stick and headed toward the river path. Mary encouraged these daily walks to bring on labor, though so far they'd produced only stronger legs and a deeper connection to the surrounding wilderness. The morning air carried autumn's first whisper, a subtle crispness that hinted at the coming seasonal shift. Sarah breathed deeply, appreciating the temporary relief from summer's humidity. The walking stick found secure purchase on the uneven trail, providing the balance her altered center of gravity demanded. At the riverbank, she eased herself onto a flat boulder warmed by early sunlight. Water moved steadily below, its constant flow a reminder of nature's persistence. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift, and stretch within the increasingly cramped quarters of her womb. Any day now, she promised. Them both, the weeks of waiting had provided unexpected gifts, time to complete final preparations, moments to imagine the coming changes, opportunities to solidify her place within the mountain community. Eleanor visited daily now, often bringing practical gifts disguised as casual offerings. Walter had delivered extra firewood just passing by. Even Dr. Harper had made the journey up the mountain road for a house call, claiming she was in the area anyway. Their concern touched Sarah deeply. So different from the anonymous existence she'd known in the city, their neighbors might not notice her absence for weeks. Here, if she failed to appear at the expected time, someone would come checking within hours. Sarah traced the carvings on her walking stick, simple symbols she'd created to mark significant moments of her mountain journey. A cabin outline near the top, a tree representing the storm, a circular garden, a crescent moon for the nights of peaceful solitude. The walking stick had become both practical support and personal talisman. Another contraction surprised her, stronger than the pre-dawn one, demanding her full attention. Sarah breathed through it, mentally noting its duration. When it passed, she remained seated, waiting to see if another would follow. 10 minutes later, a second contraction arrived, similar in intensity. Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation, but tempered it with caution. False starts had taught her to be patient, to wait for a clear pattern before alerting Mary. Using the walking stick for support, she stood carefully and began the return journey to the cabin. Each step felt deliberate, her awareness heightened to the sensations within her body. The third contraction caught her midway home, forcing her to stop and lean heavily on the walking stick until the wave passed. Inside the cabin, Sarah moved with quiet purpose, laying out the birth supplies exactly as planned. She placed the walking stick within reach of the birthing space she'd arranged, a practical measure, but also a psychological comfort, a companion that had supported her final pregnancy days. By noon, the contractions had established an unmistakable rhythm, every 8 minutes lasting almost a minute each. Sarah called Mary on the radio phone, her voice steady despite the building excitement and apprehension. "First babies take their time," Mary reminded her. "I'll head your way now, but don't expect things to happen quickly. Try to rest between contractions if you can." The midwife's practical advice anchored Sarah as the hours unfolded. She alternated between walking small circles in the cabin, supported by the carved stick, and resting in the positions they'd practiced. Each contraction required increasing focus, the pain both familiar and entirely new. Eleanor arrived first, having been alerted by Mary's assistant. Her calm presence filled the cabin with quiet confidence. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," she reminded Sarah, dampening a cloth to place on her forehead. "Your body knows exactly what to do." When Mary finally arrived, she assessed Sarah's progress with experienced hands. "You're doing beautifully," she confirmed. "Baby's in perfect position. Now we wait for your body to continue opening." The walking stick stood sentinel in the corner, as labor intensified, no longer needed for physical support, as Sarah found other positions more comfortable. Yet she found her eyes drawn to it during particularly challenging contractions, its carved symbols reminding her of all she had already overcome. Twilight painted the cabin windows deep purple when Mary announced Sarah had reached transition, the most intense phase before pushing. The pain transcended ordinary experience now, demanding complete surrender. "I don't know if I can do this," Sarah whispered during a brief respite between contractions. Eleanor took her hand, expression serene. "You already are." Those simple words carried Sarah forward as labor reached its crescendo. Her focus narrowed to breath, to the primal work of bringing life forth, to the encouraging voices of the women surrounding her. Time lost all meaning in the ancient rhythm of contraction and release, effort and rest. When the urge to push finally came, Sarah gathered her remaining strength, drawing on reserves she hadn't known she possessed. The walking stick lay forgotten as she found new support, her own determination, the steady hands of her midwife, the unbroken line of women who had traveled this path before her. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, Sarah stood on the porch, watching dust rise from the approaching car. She adjusted the sleeping infant against her shoulder, emotions swirling in anticipation of her first visitor from the world she'd left behind. Megan's compact sedan looked as out of place on the mountain road as Sarah herself had once felt. When her friend emerged, designer sunglasses perched on her head, leather boots clearly chosen for style rather than function, Sarah felt a momentary disorientation, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. "Oh my God, look at you!" Megan exclaimed, hurrying up the path. She stopped abruptly, taking in the complete picture. The renovated cabin, Sarah's transformed appearance, and most significantly, the tiny bundle against her shoulder. "You had the baby already. Why didn't you call me?" "Things happen quickly," Sarah explained, the understatement bringing a smile to her lips. 18 hours of labor hardly qualified as quick, but the days since had passed in a newborn-induced blur. "This is Emma." Megan approached cautiously, her expression softening as she peered at the infant's sleeping face. "She's perfect," she whispered, then looked up at Sarah with tears suddenly brimming. "And you look different. Good, different." Sarah led her inside, where the cabin's interior revealed the full extent of her handiwork. Megan circled slowly, taking in the restored floors, repaired walls, and carefully arranged living space, now adapted for an infant's needs. "You really did all this yourself?" Megan's tone carried the same skepticism James had expressed, but with wonder rather than judgment. "Most of it. The community helped with some of the bigger projects." Sarah settled into the rocking chair, adjusting Emma as she began to stir. "It's been quite a journey." Megan perched on the edge of the sofa, clearly trying to reconcile the Sarah before her with the friend she'd known in the city. "When you first left, I was convinced you'd be back within a month." "We all were, I know." Sarah wasn't offended by the admission. "Honestly, there were moments I thought the same. But look at you now." Megan gestured around the cabin, then focused on Sarah herself. "You're glowing. And not just new mom glow. You seem centered." Sarah considered this assessment as she shifted Emma to nurse. The changes in her body went beyond pregnancy and childbirth. Months of physical labor had strengthened her in ways no gym membership ever had. Her hands bore calluses from meaningful work. Her face had been kissed by mountain sun and wind. Even the way she moved through space had fundamentally changed, more confident, more deliberate. "I brought something for you," Megan said, digging through her overnight bag. She produced an envelope of photographs. "I thought you might want these for Emma someday." Pictures from before. Sarah balanced the nursing infant with one arm and accepted the envelope with her free hand. Inside were prints from her previous life, her teaching graduation, the housewarming party at the apartment she'd shared with James, her wedding day. The images felt like scenes from a movie she'd watched long ago, featuring an actress who resembled her but wasn't quite her. "I have some photos to show you too," Sarah said, nodding toward her grandmother's Polaroid camera on the shelf. "There's a stack next to it." Megan retrieved the small pile of instant photos Sarah had been collecting, documentation of her mountain transformation. The first showed the cabin as she'd found it, dilapidated and forlorn. Subsequent images captured stages of renovation, the developing garden, and finally, Sarah holding newborn Emma on the porch. The restored cabin providing a backdrop to their new beginning. "These are incredible," Megan said, arranging the before and after images side by side. "Like one of those renovation shows, but with a person instead of just a house," Sarah laughed. "That's one way to look at it." As evening approached, they prepared dinner together using vegetables from Sarah's garden. Megan moved through the small kitchen with city efficiency, while Sarah's rhythms had adapted to a more deliberate pace. Their conversation flowed easily despite the months apart, though Sarah noticed how often she needed to explain aspects of her daily life that would have been unremarkable to Eleanor or Mary. "James came to see me last week," Megan mentioned as they cleared the dishes. "He's still pretty confused about all this. Says he offered to help financially and you refused." "I don't need his help." Sarah's response was automatic but true. Between her savings, careful budgeting, and the self-sufficient system she'd established, she and Emma were secure. "That's what I told him," Megan said. "But I didn't really understand until seeing this place, seeing you. You've built something real here. Later, with Emma sleeping in her cradle, they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the clearing. The contrast between Megan's carefully maintained appearance and Sarah's practical simplicity had ceased to feel uncomfortable, instead highlighting the different paths their lives had taken. "Do you miss it?" Megan asked suddenly. "The city, restaurants, convenience, people." Sarah considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss specific things. Good coffee, bookstores, certain friends," she smiled at Megan. "But I don't miss the life as a whole. It wasn't making me happy, and this does, even with all the challenges?" Sarah looked toward the cabin where her daughter slept. "Happiness feels like the wrong word. It's more like alignment. Everything difficult I do here has direct meaning. The work connects to survival or comfort or beauty in ways I can see and feel." Megan nodded slowly. "I think I understand. Sort of like how different my job would feel if I could see the people my designs actually helped, instead of just sending files into the corporate void." "Exactly." Sarah appreciated her friend's effort to bridge their different realities. "It's not perfect. Winter will be hard. Raising Emma alone won't be easy anywhere. But it feels right." When they finally turned in for the night, Megan took one last look at the before and after photos she'd arranged on the kitchen table. "You should frame these," she suggested. "They tell quite a story." Sarah nodded, seeing the images through her friend's eyes, the visual evidence of a transformation that had occurred so gradually she hadn't fully appreciated its magnitude. The woman who had arrived at the mountain, broken and searching, bore little resemblance to the mother who now moved confidently through her created home. "Maybe I will," she agreed, gathering the photos carefully. These images would someday show Emma the journey that had brought them both home, a story of breakdown and rebuilding that paralleled the cabin's own resurrection. From neglect to sanctuary, the chapter flows back in time, returning to the days before Emma's birth. The first hints of autumn tinged the mountain maples with gold as Sarah worked methodically in the cabin's main room, transforming it into a birthing space. At 41 weeks pregnant, every movement required deliberate effort, her body simultaneously heavy and powerful as it prepared for labor. Mary, the midwife, arranged supplies on the kitchen table, her practiced hands sorting gauze, herbs, and medical equipment with quiet efficiency. "Birth is unpredictable," she explained, organizing items into clearly labeled containers. "We prepare for everything, then follow your body's lead." Sarah nodded, continuing to position pillows in the corner she'd selected, near the wood stove for warmth, beside the east-facing window where morning light would enter. The space felt right, instinctively correct in ways she couldn't articulate. "Your grandmother birthed your mother in this cabin," Eleanor commented, entering with an armful of fresh linens. "Right there, in fact." She nodded toward the very corner Sarah had chosen. "Women often know where they need to be. Body remembers what mind doesn't." The coincidence sent a shiver of connection through Sarah. Generations of women linked through this place, this experience. The knowledge steadied her against the undercurrent of anxiety that occasionally surfaced when considering the reality of mountain birth. Miles from modern medical facilities, Eleanor unfolded a cloth bundle she'd brought, revealing a long braided cord made from what appeared to be natural fibers, soft yet sturdy. "For you?" she said, offering it to Sarah. "Mountain women's tradition." Sarah accepted the braided rope, its texture pleasant against her palms. "What is it?" "Birth cord, handmade. Women hold it during labor, gives something to grip to pull against. Helps with the pain," Eleanor demonstrated, showing how it could be looped around a bedpost or held by a birth assistant. "My grandmother made one for my births. I made this for you." The simple tool represented practical wisdom, developed over generations of women, birthing far from hospitals. Sarah ran her fingers along the braided length, feeling the different textures incorporated into its design. Cotton for softness, jute for strength, wool for comfort. "There's more to it than just practical use," Eleanor continued, her voice softening. "Each woman who uses a birth cord adds her strength to it. Metaphorically speaking, this one was made new for you, but with old knowledge. The symbolism resonated deeply with Sarah. Throughout her pregnancy, she gradually shifted from relying solely on medical texts to valuing the generational wisdom Eleanor represented. The birth cord embodied this integration, traditional knowledge alongside Mary's modern midwifery training. Dr. Harper arrived later that afternoon for a final prenatal check, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. "Blood pressure's perfect," she noted, putting away her equipment. "Baby's position is ideal. You've done remarkably well preparing for this." The doctor surveyed the birthing space with clinical assessment. "Mary knows to call me if anything unusual develops. I can be here in 30 minutes, weather permitting." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I've attended over 1,000 births, and women like you, healthy, prepared, well-supported, almost never need medical intervention." This vote of confidence from the formerly skeptical physician meant more than Sarah had expected. She'd come to respect Dr. Harper's blunt honesty and practical approach. So different from her city doctor's detached professionalism. After the doctor departed, Sarah continued nesting preparations, an instinctive urge she'd initially resisted as irrational, but now embraced as biological wisdom. Fresh herbs hung drying near the wood stove, selected for their healing properties. The cradle waited in the bedroom, dressed with the handmade quilt. Every surface gleamed from repeated cleaning. That evening, Sarah sat on the porch, watching sunset paint the mountains in deepening shades of purple. The braided birth cord rested in her lap, her fingers absently tracing its patterns. The cabin behind her stood prepared, as ready as a place could be for the transformation about to occur within its walls. "Almost time to meet you," she told her unborn child, feeling the responsive shift and stretch beneath her palm. "We've prepared everything we can." The radiophone Mary had insisted upon sat charged and ready on the kitchen counter. Emergency contacts were listed beside it. Mary's number, Dr. Harper's direct line, Walter who could clear the road if weather turned, Eleanor who would come at any hour. A community of support Sarah had never expected when she first arrived, broken and alone. A gentle contraction tightened across her belly, one of many practice waves her body had been sending in recent weeks. Sarah breathed through it, timing its duration out of habit. When it passed, she remained focused on the sunset, noting how the quality of light had subtly shifted since summer's height, how the evening air carried the first crisp notes of seasonal change. Inside, she added another log to the wood stove, ensuring the cabin would remain warm through the night. The birth cord found its place draped over the edge of the birthing space, ready for her hands when labor finally began. Sarah moved through her evening routine with deliberate presence, aware that these might be her final hours alone. In bed that night, sleep proved elusive. The baby's movements seemed particularly active, as if sharing her anticipation. Sarah reviewed mental checklists, reassuring herself that nothing essential remained undone. The birth supplies were organized. The cabin was prepared. Her body, despite moments of doubt, was designed for this ancient work. "We're ready," she whispered into the darkness. "Whenever you are." The braided cord Eleanor had created represented something beyond its physical form, a tangible connection to women who had labored in these mountains for generations, who had found strength in the same landscape that had healed Sarah's broken spirit. Women who had faced the intensity of birth with courage, without modern medicine's safety nets. If they could do it, so could she. Sarah finally drifted to sleep with one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other near the birth cord on her bedside table. Outside, the mountain stood sentinel as it had for countless births before, timeless witness to the eternal cycle of ending and beginning, breaking and healing, labor and reward. The change in barometric pressure woke Sarah before the contractions began. Outside her window, dawn revealed an ominous sky, dark clouds hanging unnaturally low over the ridge, the mountain air preternaturally still. Weather was coming, and not the gentle kind. She felt the first contraction while making tea, a tightening that began in her lower back and wrapped around her abdomen with unmistakable purpose. This was different from the practice waves of previous weeks, more focused, more intentional. Sarah closed her eyes and breathed through it, mentally noting its duration. By the time she called Mary on the radio phone, the contractions were coming every 12 minutes, each one requiring her complete attention. "I think this is real," she told the midwife, trying to keep her voice calm, despite the mixture of excitement and apprehension flooding her system. Mary's response was immediate. "I'm on my way." "But Sarah, there's a storm system moving in. Might be a big one. I'll try to beat it there." Through the kitchen window, Sarah watched dark clouds advancing over the mountain ridges like an invading army. The wind had begun to rise, pine trees swaying in rhythmic waves. Weather forecasts had mentioned potential snow, unusual for October, but not unprecedented at this elevation. Another contraction gripped her, stronger than the last. Sarah leaned against the counter, focusing on her breath as Mary had taught her. When it passed, she moved with renewed urgency, completing the final preparations they'd rehearsed. Fresh water in pitchers by the birthing space, extra wood stacked beside the stove, towels warming near the fire. She'd just finished when headlights swept across the cabin as Mary's truck navigated the increasingly treacherous road. The midwife entered briskly, shaking snowflakes from her coat, the first advance scouts of the approaching storm. "Perfect timing," Mary commented, setting down her equipment. "Your grandmother used to say babies and storms arrive together on this mountain." She performed a quick examination, confirming what Sarah already knew. "You're in established labor. Baby's in excellent position. Now we wait and work." The storm intensified as Sarah's labor progressed. Wind howled around the cabin corners, finding every microscopic gap in the weatherproofing. The first power flicker came during a particularly intense contraction, the lights dimming momentarily before returning. "Might lose electricity," Mary warned, unpacking additional supplies. Mountain births rarely go according to plan. As if summoned by her words, the cabin plunged into darkness during the next contraction. The sudden absence of mechanical hum revealed other sounds: wind's moaning voice, the crackle of fire in the wood stove. Sarah's deliberate breathing as she worked through the pain. "Under the sink," Sarah managed between breaths. "Emergency box." Mary located the supplies Sarah had carefully assembled months earlier. Headlamps, battery lanterns, candles, all part of her meticulous preparation for mountain life's uncertainties. But it was Eleanor's arrival an hour later that brought the most meaningful light source. The older woman stamped snow from her boots before entering, carrying a package wrapped in quilted fabric. "I thought you might need this," she said, unwrapping an antique oil lantern of brass and glass. "Your grandmother had it lit when your mother was born." "Her mother before that?" The lantern's warm glow created a sphere of golden light in the birthing corner. Sarah felt an immediate connection to the women who had labored in this same space, under this same light, bringing forth new life while winter storms raged outside. The continuity steadied her as contractions intensified, pain building with each wave. Snow accumulated against the windows as daylight faded, the storm and Sarah's labor building in parallel rhythm. Time lost conventional meaning, measured instead by the space between contractions. The gradual dilation Mary reported with each check. The shifting quality of Sarah's vocalizations as she moved deeper into labor's territory. "You're doing beautifully," Eleanor murmured, wiping Sarah's forehead with a cool cloth. "Your body knows exactly what to do. Just follow it." The lantern's flame remained steady while everything else in Sarah's world contracted and released, expanded and receded. Its light illuminated Mary's hands as she monitored the baby's heartbeat between contractions. It cast Eleanor's supportive presence in warm relief against the cabin walls. It provided a focal point when pain threatened to overwhelm Sarah's concentration. Outside, the storm reached its crescendo, wind screaming through the forest, snow building in drifts against the cabin walls. Inside, Sarah approached transition, the most intense phase of labor. Each contraction now required complete surrender, a letting go of control that challenged everything in her independent nature. "I can't," she gasped, after a particularly overwhelming wave. "You already are," Eleanor reminded her, offering the birth cord they'd positioned within reach. Sarah gripped it during the next contraction, drawing strength from its braided length, from the knowledge it represented, from the women supporting her through this ancient passage. The lantern's glow highlighted the determination in her face as she moved from resistance to acceptance, from fear to focused power. Mary's experienced hands guided her through position changes that eased the baby's descent. Eleanor's steady presence anchored her to the generations of women who had crossed this threshold before her. Snow continued falling as Sarah entered the pushing phase, her body assuming control with instinctive wisdom. The lantern witnessed her transformation from pregnant woman to laboring force of nature, its unwavering light a testament to endurance and continuity. "I see the head," Mary announced as Sarah bore down with newfound purpose. "Reach down and touch your baby." Sarah's fingers encountered the miracle of her child emerging into the world. Wet hair, the curve of a tiny skull, the physical manifestation of all these months of preparation and change. The connection sent a surge of renewed energy through her exhausted body. With the next contraction, she gathered her remaining strength, working in harmony with forces larger than herself. The lantern's flame flickered as a particularly strong gust of wind found entry through some invisible seam, then steadied again, just as Sarah found her final reservoir of determination. "One more push," Mary encouraged, hands positioned to guide the baby's arrival. Outside, the storm began to ease, as if nature recognized the imminent completion of the work within the cabin walls. The lantern's glow reflected in the snow-bright windows, creating a cocoon of light around the birthing space where Sarah prepared to complete her journey from broken woman to mother. Eleanor steadied the lantern, ensuring its light remained constant as the moment of transformation approached, birth not just of a child, but of a mother, of a family, of a future built from conscious choice rather than expectation or convention. The cabin that had once represented Sarah's escape now bore witness to her arrival, not at a physical destination, but at the person she had been becoming through all these months of labor, both literal and metaphorical. Under her grandmother's lantern, Sarah prepared to push one final time, bringing new life into the mountain world that had restored her own. "One more push," Mary encouraged, her calm voice anchoring Sarah to the moment. Sarah gathered her remaining strength, bearing down with primal focus. The pressure built to an impossible crescendo, then suddenly released in a rush of sensation. A slippery warmth emerged from her body, followed by the most remarkable sound she had ever heard. Her child's first cry, indignant and perfect, announcing arrival with unmistakable presence. "It's a girl," Mary announced, placing the vernix-covered newborn on Sarah's chest. Born in the heart of the storm, just like her mother planned. Time suspended as Sarah gazed at her daughter for the first time. Tiny features scrunched in protest against the sudden brightness of the world. Impossibly small fingers flexing and curling against Sarah's skin. The profound connection was immediate and overwhelming. Recognition of a person she had known intimately, yet was meeting for the first time. "Hello, Emma," Sarah whispered. The name she'd chosen months ago, feeling suddenly perfectly right. "We did it." Snow continued falling beyond the windows, but inside the cabin, time had acquired new meaning. The practical aspects of birth continued, delivering the placenta, Mary's careful check for tears needing repair, Emma's first successful latch at the breast. Yet these events occurred in a dreamlike state, where nothing existed beyond the small circle illuminated by grandmother's lantern. Eleanor wiped tears from her weathered cheeks. 3 generations of women born in this cabin now, she said softly. Your grandmother would be so proud. As dawn approached, the storm gentled to occasional flurries. The immediate intensity of birth gave way to quiet wonder, as Sarah studied every perfect detail of her daughter, the whirl of dark hair, The delicate arch of eyebrows, tiny fingernails like miniature seashells. "You did beautifully," Mary said, packing her supplies after ensuring both mother and baby were stable. "I'll be back tomorrow, weather permitting." "Eleanor will stay with you tonight," Sarah nodded, too absorbed in her new reality to form adequate words of gratitude. The midwife had guided her through the most transformative experience of her life with steady competence and genuine care. "Thank you" seemed insufficient against the magnitude of what they had shared. The day passed in the timeless haze of new motherhood. Sarah drifted between sleep and waking, each time returning to consciousness with the startling joy of remembering Emma's existence. Eleanor moved quietly around the cabin, keeping the wood stove fed, preparing simple food, gently guiding Sarah through these first hours of motherhood. That evening, as Eleanor dozed in the rocking chair and Emma slept swaddled in her cradle, Sarah felt compelled to record what had occurred, to capture the raw power of birth while it remained vivid in her body's memory. She reached for the handmade journal that had documented her cabin restoration. Finding blank pages at the back, the pen moved across paper with unexpected grace, her normally practical handwriting transforming into something more deliberate and beautiful. Sarah recorded every detail: the first contraction at dawn, the storm's arrival, the power failure that brought grandmother's lantern into service, the gradual opening of her body, the moment of crowning, the miraculous emergence of her daughter into the world. Writing became a way of processing the experience, of acknowledging its magnitude. Sarah found herself using language she would have dismissed as overly poetic months earlier, yet now it seemed the only way to capture the truth of what had occurred. Birth had transcended the physical, becoming a passage between her former self and who she was becoming. She wrote through the night, pausing only to nurse Emma when she woke hungry. The account became more than a simple record. It was the first chapter of Emma's story, a testament to the strength they had found together, a love letter to the child who had journeyed with her through months of transformation. Dawn revealed a transformed world outside the windows. Snow blanketed the clearing, smoothing the rough edges of stumps and rocks, creating a pristine landscape that mirrored Sarah's sense of new beginning. The storm had cleared overnight, leaving brilliant blue sky and dazzling white ground that reflected morning sunlight into every corner of the cabin. Sarah added this final image to her account: the perfect symbolism of Emma being born through darkness into light, through storm into clarity. She completed the birth story with her daughter cradled in one arm, her handwriting acquiring an almost calligraphic quality in these final paragraphs. When Eleanor woke and approached to check on them, she found Sarah gazing at her sleeping daughter with an expression of profound peace. The completed birth story lay open on the bedside table, its pages filled with Sarah's transformed handwriting. "I've never seen you write like that," Eleanor commented, glancing at the beautiful script. "I've never felt like this before," Sarah replied simply. Emma stirred, dark eyes blinking open to study her mother's face with newborn concentration. Sarah marveled at the perfection of the moment, the snow-bright morning light streaming through windows, the steady warmth from the wood stove, Eleanor's grandmotherly presence, and most miraculous of all, her daughter's gaze meeting hers with what felt like ancient recognition. The cabin that had once represented Sarah's escape had become the birthplace of her future. The hands that had repaired its broken parts now cradled new life. The woman who had arrived broken had emerged whole, not despite her challenges, but because of how she had faced them. In the pages of Emma's birth story, Sarah had documented not just a physical event, but her own rebirth. The careful calligraphy recorded what could never be adequately expressed: how completely love could transform a life, how strength could emerge from vulnerability, how a place once foreign could become so profoundly home. Emma's tiny hand wrapped around Sarah's finger with surprising strength, a gesture that seemed to seal the unspoken covenant between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together in this mountain sanctuary they both now claimed by birthright. "Welcome home," Sarah whispered to her daughter, the words encompassing far more than the physical structure surrounding them. Spring arrived on the mountain in gentle stages, first with subtle shifts in light quality, then with the emergence of tiny green buds on seemingly lifeless branches, finally with an explosion of wildflowers dotting the clearing around the cabin. 3 months had passed since Emma's birth, a period of hibernation and adjustment as mother and daughter learned each other's rhythms through the quiet isolation of winter. Sarah carried Emma in a fabric sling across her chest as she walked the property's perimeter, assessing winter's impact and planning spring projects. The baby slept peacefully, lulled by her mother's steady movement and the whispering mountain breeze. "This will be your first spring," Sarah told her sleeping daughter. "Everything is waking up to meet you." The garden space awaited preparation, last autumn's storm damage now fully cleared. Sarah had spent winter evenings planning expansions, sketching irrigation improvements, researching what would grow best in the mountain's abbreviated growing season. With Emma's arrival, self-sufficiency had transformed from personal challenge to maternal responsibility. Near the garden's edge, a small tree sapling waited in its temporary pot, a gift from Walter, who had appeared at her door the previous week with the fragile apple seedling and gruff instructions for its care. "From good stock," he'd explained, nodding toward the ancient apple trees that bordered his own property. Fruit in 3 years if tended right. The symbolism hadn't escaped Sarah. 3 years, a commitment to this place, to this life, to allowing roots to deepen rather than seeking another fresh start. Emma stirred against her chest, dark eyes blinking open to study the dappled sunlight filtering through pine branches. At 3 months, she had already developed distinct preferences and expressions, a serious gaze when encountering something new, a particular smile reserved for morning greetings, stubborn determination when attempting to lift her head during tummy time on the cabin floor. "We're going to plant our tree today," Sarah explained, as if the infant could understand the significance. "A little ceremony to mark our first spring together." She had prepared the spot carefully, digging a hole twice the width of the root ball, adding compost from her winter kitchen scraps, positioning the location for optimal sun exposure, while ensuring protection from harsh mountain winds. The detailed preparation reflected how thoroughly Sarah's approach to life had evolved, from city dwellers' impatience to mountain mother's measured consideration. Eleanor arrived as Sarah was gathering her planting tools, bringing freshly baked bread and early spring greens from her greenhouse. The older woman had become a regular presence in their lives, appearing with practical gifts and timely wisdom about infant care that supplemented Sarah's books and instincts. "Perfect day for tree planting," Eleanor observed, taking Emma into her experienced arms. "She's growing like a mountain laurel in May, almost outgrowing her newborn clothes," Sarah agreed, gathering the final supplies. Hard to believe how quickly time passes now, when winter seems so endless. They formed a small procession to the planting site, Sarah carrying the sapling, Eleanor holding Emma, the 3 of them representing different seasons of womanhood connected through choice and circumstance. The spring sunshine warmed their shoulders as Sarah carefully positioned the tree in its prepared hole. "My mother taught me that trees should be planted with intention," Eleanor said, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Words given to the roots tend to manifest in the fruit." Sarah smiled at the mountain wisdom that once would have seemed superstitious, but now felt intuitively right. She placed her hands on the sapling's slender trunk, feeling its quiet life force. "I plant this tree as a promise," she said softly. "A promise to stay, to nurture growth, to create stability." Her voice strengthened with each word. "This tree will grow alongside Emma, marking her seasons, providing beauty and sustenance in equal measure." Eleanor nodded approval, then extended Emma toward the sapling. Sarah guided her daughter's tiny hand to touch the smooth bark, completing the circle of intention. "Your tree," she whispered in Emma's ear. "Your home," Together they filled the hole, Sarah tamping down soil, while Eleanor sprinkled the first watering, baptizing the tree into its new life. The simple ceremony complete, they returned to the cabin porch to enjoy Eleanor's fresh bread with honey from a neighboring farm. The afternoon sun illuminated the cabin's exterior, highlighting how completely the structure had transformed since Sarah's arrival last year. Fresh paint on the shutters, new steps replacing the rotted porch boards, window boxes waiting for summer flowers. Each improvement represented hours of labor, tangible manifestations of healing and growth. "I received a letter from the school district," Sarah mentioned, as they watched shadows lengthen across the clearing. "They're looking for a part-time English teacher next fall. Just 2 days a week." Eleanor's expression remained neutral, though her eyes revealed pleased recognition of this development. "You thinking about it?" "I am." Sarah adjusted Emma against her shoulder, breathing in her sweet scent. "I never stopped loving teaching, just needed to step away from everything for a while." "Roots and wings," Eleanor commented. "Need both to thrive." The phrase captured Sarah's evolving understanding perfectly. She had come to the mountain seeking escape, but discovered instead a place to truly belong, not through desperate grasping, but through meaningful connection to land, community, and purpose. As evening approached, Sarah sat in the rocking chair by the newly planted tree, nursing Emma while watching the last light gild the mountain ridges. The cabin behind her stood solid and welcoming, no longer an emergency refuge, but a deliberately chosen home. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks and challenges. Gardening to begin, repairs to complete, the ongoing adventure of raising a daughter in this beautiful but demanding environment. But tonight, Sarah simply existed in the perfect contentment of this moment. Her daughter in her arms, her home secured by her own hands, her future unfolding with organic purpose. The sapling's delicate branches stirred in the evening breeze, its first tiny leaves unfurling with the same determined optimism that had carried Sarah through her own transformation. From broken to whole, from isolated to connected, from escaping to arriving, Emma's eyes drifted closed, her small body relaxing into complete trust against her mother's heart. Sarah continued rocking gently, one hand cradling her daughter while the other extended to touch the sapling's tender trunk, physically connecting their parallel journeys of growth. "Welcome to our first spring," she whispered to both child and tree. "The first of many,